A retired veteran takes a quiet job as a security escort on a luxury cruise ship. But in the middle of the ocean, the calm is shattered when armed pirates surround the vessel. Surrounded by terrified passengers and an unforgiving sea, he must face a new battle he never imagined fighting. Before listening to this thrilling story, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this. Let's begin. The sun slipped faintly through the blinds of the small coastal cabin where Samuel Rojas lived. It had been 15 years since he hung up his uniform, and while his body had learned to move at a slower pace, his mind still carried discipline in every thought. That morning, as he poured coffee into his usual mug, a worn souvenir with his regiment's crest, the landline, which rarely rang, broke the silence. "Samuel?" A deep voice asked on the other end. "It's Ortega. We've got something for you." "Ortega? It's been years." "What kind of something?" Samuel replied, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "Nothing dangerous," the man assured him. "A security escort job. A cruise. 3 weeks. Good pay." Samuel set the mug down, thinking. It wasn't common for an old comrade to call with an offer like this. He had sworn never to get involved in anything that smelled of weapons or conflict again. But the word cruise brought up images of sun, sea, and maybe a chance to clear his head. Ortega explained it was just about accompanying a high-profile passenger, keeping a low profile, and making sure nothing happened to them. "A walk in the park," he said. The offer sounded too simple to be true, and Samuel knew from experience that when something seemed too easy, it often had a dark side. Still, he accepted. Maybe it was the need to feel useful again. Maybe the temptation to break the routine. Or maybe, deep down, he sensed this trip would change everything. He spent the rest of the day packing the little he needed. Comfortable clothes, a couple of formal shirts, an old waterproof watch, and a small notebook where he wrote down anything important. He wouldn't bring weapons. Ortega had made it clear. "This isn't a military operation, Sam. Just company." That night, the salty wind drifted through the open window. Lying in the dark, Samuel listened to the waves breaking on the shore. Something inside him whispered that the sea held secrets he wasn't yet ready to uncover. The morning of departure arrived with a clear sky. At the port, the cruise ship loomed large, a white giant shining under the sun. Samuel watched smiling families, couples with rolling suitcases, and crew members moving with precision. He stood apart, scanning every movement, every expression. He couldn't help it. Old soldier habits never die. "Ready for your stroll, old friend?" Ortega appeared out of nowhere, wearing sunglasses and a relaxed smile. "Ready," Samuel answered, though his voice carried more caution than excitement. As they walked up the gangway, Samuel felt he was crossing an invisible threshold, leaving behind familiar shores and stepping into a floating world, trapped between steel and open sea. The breeze carried the scent of the ocean mixed with fuel and salt. He wasn't sure whether to feel free or confined. The ship's horn sounded, deep and powerful, announcing they would soon set sail. Samuel leaned on the railing, watching the port drift away. The journey had begun, though deep down, he had the uneasy feeling this would be nothing like the cruises shown in glossy brochures. The cruise ship rose above the water like a white city. Samuel walked the gangway with steady steps, carrying only a small suitcase and his notebook tucked inside his jacket. The hum of hundreds of voices reached him like a tide different from the sea. Laughter, greetings in several languages, the rolling of suitcases, short orders from the crew. All that noise felt distant to him, as if he were stepping into a play without a clear role. Still, he noticed every detail. He spotted security guards with radios, a woman in a blue uniform counting life jackets, a technician checking a camera high above. Nothing out of place, except for the sheer size of the ship, which demanded respect. In the main lobby, Crystal chandeliers hung like jellyfish. The floor shone, soft music played, and the air carried a scent of flowers and salt. A young receptionist handed him a magnetic key card. "Room 1128, Deck 11, she said with a practiced smile. Samuel nodded and stepped away. He didn't like rehearsed smiles. He preferred looks that told the truth. The elevator rose slowly. In front of him, a mirror reflected a middle-aged man with broad shoulders, short beard, and tired eyes that never lost focus. "Just an escort," he reminded himself. "No weapons. Keep a low profile." He repeated the phrase like a mental anchor. When the elevator opened, a long hallway stretched ahead, lined with soft carpets and identical doors. He unlocked his. The room was simple and clean. A double bed, a desk, and a balcony facing the ocean. He left his suitcase on the floor, unpacked nothing, and stepped outside. The sea, still close to the port, looked like a sheet of blue just beginning to tighten. At the emergency drill, he blended in with the passengers. He noticed nervous hands adjusting straps, eyes seeking approval, restless children, couples taking photos as if it were part of the show. The instructor spoke clearly, pointing out routes and meeting points. Samuel memorized exits, stairways, and intersections. He also measured distances, from the theater to the bridge, from the main deck to the lifeboats. His eyes moved constantly, as if sketching an internal map. He wrote 3 notes in his book. Fastby stairwell. Service corridor behind restaurant. Maintenance door, deck 10. Later, the open deck turned into a parade of hats and sunglasses. The wind carried salt and laughter. Samuel leaned on the railing and let the breeze hit his face. Sunlight glittered on the water like living metal. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the horn that signaled departure. The ship began to move with a barely noticeable tremor. The city was behind them. Ahead lay an endless horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said an older man beside him, holding a camera. "Yes," Samuel replied. "It's big. The first time is always impressive," the man went on. "I travel every year. You think you know the sea, but the sea always shows another face. So I've heard." Samuel gave a small smile and continued his quiet routine, watching, measuring, learning. In the main restaurant, he studied the layout of the tables, the exit to the kitchen, the placement of columns that could serve as cover. At the pool area, he counted 2 lifeguards paying attention and a third distracted by his phone. In the shopping gallery, he noted the reflection in the shop windows and how easily one could see who was approaching from behind. He stopped at an information panel, read the deck names, the routes to the lifeboats, and the total number of passengers on board. The numbers didn't scare him, but they reminded him of his role. Inside this ship, he was an invisible part meant to act if something went wrong. By sunset, the sky was glowing orange. The speakers announced a welcome cocktail in the theater. Keeping to his low profile, Samuel went in a simple shirt and sat in the back row. He watched the performers prepare a short act, the captain give a polite greeting, and the entertainment director promise an unforgettable trip. The applause was warm. Everything seemed in place. Too in place, Samuel thought. Like a sheet so perfectly flat, it must be hiding a fold. "Mr. Rojas," a flight attendant whispered, leaning toward him discreetly. "You're wanted at reception. Now." "Yes. Someone left an envelope for you." Down in the lobby, the same young woman from before handed him a plain white envelope, no sender. He opened it in a corner, shielding the contents with his body. Inside was a card with a handwritten note. "Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, deck 8, aft bar. Come alone." No signature. He frowned. The ink was fresh. The paper smelled faintly of expensive perfume. He asked who had delivered it, but the young woman shook her head. No one had seen anything. It had simply appeared in the tray. He returned to his room with the note in his inside pocket. On the balcony, Night had spread, and the ship carved a dark path through the sea. The wind was colder. He thought of Ortega. Did he know about this? Was it part of the job? Samuel decided not to call. First watch, then act. He slipped the card under his notebook and checked the door lock twice. He turned off the lights, but didn't sleep right away. He listened to the deep, steady thrum of the engine beneath him, a heartbeat running through the hull. For now, it matched the rhythm of his own vigilance. Before closing his eyes, he reminded himself of the simplest rule he'd learned in service. Calm can be a mask. The cruise seemed flawless. The sea, a friendly mirror. And he, just another guest. But someone had slipped an anonymous invitation into his hands. And such invitations almost never lead to innocent places. Samuel woke before dawn. As always, the ship breathed with a deep hum that seeped through the walls, a steady pulse that kept life on board moving. He made coffee with the room's kettle, opened the balcony, and let the salty air clear his head. The horizon was a clean, almost perfect line. At this hour, the cruise ship felt empty, just the occasional early jogger and the sound of a hose washing the deck. He dressed simply and went for a walk. Deck 11 connected to Deck 10 through a little-used side staircase. He made a mental note of the shortcut. He walked the service corridor behind the restaurant, memorizing doors leading to kitchens, storage rooms, and laundry. He greeted a waiter pushing a cart of dishes. No one paid him much attention. That was good. The less they noticed him, the better he could notice them. At exactly 8 o'clock, he reached the aft bar on Deck 8, just as the note had said. The place was almost empty, still without music. The bartender polished glasses, paying attention to nothing in particular. At the bar, a woman in a gray dress sat alone, drinking water. She wore no jewelry and seemed in no rush. Samuel sat 2 stools away and ordered coffee. "Beautiful morning," the woman said, without looking at him. "Good for sailing," he replied. That was all, brief, clean, like a greeting between people who didn't want to remember each other's faces. The woman left a cardboard coaster on the counter and stood up. The bartender came over to clear it away and, without a second thought, slid it towards Samuel as if moving something out of the way. Inside the coaster was a folded card. Samuel didn't open it there. He took his coffee and stepped into the hallway. After 20 steps, he turned left and paused in front of a souvenir display. Then he read it. "Stick to your routine. Watch for changes. This afternoon, 1900 hours, promenade deck, starboard side. Look at the sea. Come alone." He slipped the card into his notebook. No names, no stamps, no signature. That kind of silence wasn't new to him. The instruction was simple. Don't break the rhythm. And that's what he did. He returned to the main deck, just as most passengers were going down for breakfast. He blended in with families looking for a table, couples arguing over which excursions to take at the next port, and young people carrying towels over their shoulders like flags. He observed without hurry, counting how many guards patrolled in plain sight and how many lingered in discreet corners. He tracked staff rotations, who opened cafes, who closed shops, who switched shifts without speaking to anyone. By noon, the sea was a deep blue sheet. Samuel leaned on the portside railing, letting the sun warm his hands. The water's reflection brought back an old memory. An instructor once told him the sea doesn't shout, it warns. Back then, he'd learned to read currents, shadows, and foam lines. Now, that old skill merged with his new, still unnamed job, which already had shape. Watching. Watching with patience. Watching without getting in the way. He ate lightly at the buffet, taking a corner table with his back to the wall. From there, the flow of people was like a readable current. He spotted the man with the camera from the day before, lifting the lens toward gulls that never came close. He noticed a couple arguing quietly. The man moving his hand as he spoke, the woman gripping her napkin as if it were a secret. He saw two crew members gesturing quickly in front of a locked service door. Everything seemed normal, within that order that sometimes hides wrinkles. He noted times, familiar faces, and cleaning routes. In the afternoon, the theater hosted a dance class. Samuel stopped at the entrance just to watch. The steps told stories. People laughed, awkward but happy. His body remembered another kind of class. Long ago, when returning to base after patrol felt like learning to walk again. Breathe, his mind told him. Keep your pulse steady. Don't look at the same spot 3 times. Don't rush. At 1840, he headed for the promenade deck. The sun was lowering, and the wind carried a sharper chill. The starboard side faced west. The light made the wake shimmer. Samuel chose a section where the railing had a small bend. A good spot to glance both ways without being obvious. He leaned there, letting the sea fill his view. Behind him, people strolled casually. A child with ice cream, a woman with a shawl, a young man with headphones. The cruise kept its quiet party going. At 1903, the woman in the gray dress passed 2 meters away, not stopping. She slid her bag along the railing as if adjusting the strap, and kept walking. Left behind, stuck to the metal, was a tiny folded slip of paper. Samuel waited 10 seconds, counted another 10, still looking at the horizon. Then slowly, he took the paper and pocketed it unopened. He walked to a quieter corner near a door marked Restricted Access. Only then did he read, "Your priority is not the ship. It's a person. Stay 2 corridors away until further notice. No contact. Do not approach. If there's noise, you arrive last." At the bottom, a number, 12 to 34. It didn't say if it was a cabin, a code, or a decoy. He returned to his room with the ship's rhythm in his steps. Night was falling. He switched on the desk lamp, placed the new note beside the first, and unfolded the ship's map he'd taken from the lobby. He found 12 to 34. Deck 12, cabin 34, starboard side. He marked a couple of alternate routes, and an escape path. Nothing more. The order was clear. Distance, shadow, weight. He accepted the weight of that patience. The same kind that had saved him before. If he wanted answers, he first had to let the ship speak in its own time. "Calm," he murmured under his breath. When he turned off the light, the cruise ship had already dimmed some of its own. Only soft hallway lamps, scattered laughter, and faint music remained. The rest belonged to the sea. The routine was now set. Watch without being seen, memorize without obsession, accept the missing pieces. Tomorrow, he told himself, would be the time to tie the threads that today only brushed the surface. Samuel woke before the rest of the ship. The early morning silence was broken only by the steady hum of the engines and the rhythmic splash of water against the hull. He dressed in comfortable clothes and a cap to blend in with the other passengers. There was no rush, but no room for distraction either. Last night's note was still on the desk, and the number 12 to 34 was already carved into his memory. He decided not to go there right away. Instead, he went up to deck 12 and took a long walk, playing the part of a curious tourist pausing to look at the sea. He passed by the cabin area and, out of the corner of his eye, spotted the door to cabin 34. It was closed. A sign hung from the handle, "Do not disturb." But a moment later, he heard a faint thud, like a glass being set on a table. Someone was inside. He kept walking without slowing. Around the corner, he crossed paths with a cleaning attendant pushing a cart. "Good morning," Samuel greeted. "Good morning, sir," she replied, and kept moving. Those were the kind of interactions he needed. Polite, short, and forgettable. He went down to the deck below and found a discreet vantage point. There was a small reading room with large windows, usually empty. From there, thanks to a reflection in the glass, He could see anyone coming or going from that hallway. During the morning, he saw only two movements: a waiter delivering a breakfast tray, and a tall man in a light suit who walked past but didn't stop. The rest of the time, nothing. Samuel used the quiet to review his notebook, marking the nearest escape route and blind spots in that part of the ship. After lunch, while having coffee in the central cafe, an envelope appeared under his cup. The waiter who placed it there said nothing. Inside was a new instruction: the passenger in 12 to 34 doesn't know you're protecting them. Avoid all contact. Your cover is that of an ordinary passenger. Priority: don't draw attention. Watch for anyone who approaches more than 3 times in a day. Samuel read the note twice. Whoever was running this wanted to keep everything invisible in his world. That meant either the threat was still far away, or it was too quiet to be seen. That afternoon, from the upper deck, he saw the target for the first time. Not in a direct encounter, but in a passing moment. A young woman, no older than 30, with dark hair tied back, wearing simple but tasteful clothes. She walked alone, a book in her hand, eyes forward. What stood out wasn't what she did, but what she didn't do. No shopping stops, no casual chats, no sign of enjoying the trip like the others. Samuel kept his distance. He followed her until she stepped into a private room near the luxury restaurant. He couldn't see who she met with, but 30 minutes later she came out with the same calm, steady pace. Nothing in her behavior screamed danger. But people with secrets often train themselves to look that way. That night, the theater hosted a magic show. Samuel went to avoid suspicion. From the shadows of the back row, he saw the woman from 12 to 34 sitting 3 rows from the stage alone. Around her, seats were filled with couples and groups. Throughout the show, no one approached her. When it ended, she left before most of the audience. Samuel waited 2 minutes, then saw her vanish into the crowd in the lobby. When he returned to his cabin, there was another card under the door. She's not alone. The second move will happen soon. Watch deck 5 tomorrow. Samuel placed the card with the others. He leaned on the balcony railing and stared at the ocean's darkness. Above, the stars felt closer than the shore. The puzzle pieces seemed to be lining up, but there was still no clear picture. The job was still the same: silence, distance, awareness. The kind of mission that demands more patience than action. Until it doesn't. Stay in the shadows, he told himself, closing the balcony door. The morning was clear, with a calm sea stretching endlessly in every direction. Following his instructions, Samuel headed to deck 5. This level was quieter than the upper decks, used mostly for walking or sitting to enjoy the view. Perfect for a discreet meeting, or for watching someone without drawing attention. The veteran chose a shaded bench near a side exit. From there, he could see much of the outer walkway and a section of railing that overlooked the sea. It didn't take long for him to notice the woman from cabin 12 to 34. She wore a light sweater and dark pants, carrying the same book as the day before. She walked slowly, like someone stretching her legs with no particular destination. Samuel pretended to check his phone while actually scanning his surroundings. 2 men stood about 10 meters from the woman, leaning against the railing. They wore casual clothes and looked like tourists, but something about their stance didn't fit. They spoke quietly, barely moving. The sea breeze carried bits of their conversation to Samuel. "I told you, not here. It's the only time she's alone." "No, not yet. Wait for the signal." The woman passed by without looking at them. Neither man approached her, but both followed her with their eyes until she disappeared through a door to the interior. Samuel stayed still, as if he hadn't heard a thing. He knew information was easiest to gather when the other side thought there were no witnesses. He stayed on deck a few more minutes, watching as the 2 men moved off toward the opposite end of the ship. They didn't speak now, but their slow pace was the kind of rhythm kept by people who didn't want to lose sight of something or someone. Samuel memorized their appearance. One tall, with a patchy beard. The other shorter, shaved head, and a small backpack slung over one shoulder. By mid-morning, more passengers came looking for sun. Among the chatter and the steady sound of the waves, Samuel caught another voice, this time behind him. An older man was speaking on the phone, his tone low, but the words slipped through in the pauses. Yes, the woman. Deck 12. Tonight or tomorrow. No, not alone. The other will be there. Samuel kept his eyes on the horizon, listening to every word. He couldn't risk turning and being recognized. When the man finished the call and walked away, Samuel waited a full minute before getting up. He moved inside, replaying what he'd just heard. Tonight or tomorrow, and the other will be there. Not enough to know the plan, but enough to confirm this wasn't paranoia. More than one person had an interest in his target. He decided to have lunch in the same area as the woman, but far enough to avoid suspicion. She ate alone, staring out the window. No one approached her. Still, Samuel noticed the bearded man pass the dining room entrance twice in under 15 minutes. The second time, he carried a soft drink, but didn't sit, just glanced briefly at her table before leaving. In the afternoon, while most passengers lounged by the pool, Samuel used the quiet to walk past cabin 12 to 34 again. The Do Not Disturb sign was still on the door. Inside, he heard a faint murmur, like someone speaking on the phone. He didn't stop. He took the nearest stairs down to deck 5 to check if the two men were still around. They weren't, but another passenger, a slim young man in a cap, stood at the exact spot where the others had spoken that morning. He had headphones on, but didn't seem to be listening to music. His focus was on something beyond the railing. The day ended with a thin mist on the horizon. Samuel spent some time on the upper deck, reviewing the faces and voices in his mind. He'd heard too much to ignore, but still didn't have a clear pattern. Were they crew? Passengers with their own agenda? Or just coincidences his sharpened instincts turned into threats? That night, returning to his cabin, he found another card under the door. Tomorrow, deck 7 bow section. Be alert at 1600 hours. Don't interfere yet. The handwriting matched the earlier notes. Samuel set the card on the table and poured himself a glass of water. From the balcony, he looked out into the blackness of the sea. He knew the line between waiting and reacting could snap in seconds, and when it did, there would be no room for mistakes. The day began under a partly cloudy sky, but the sea remained calm. Samuel drank his morning coffee early, replaying the instructions from the night before. Tomorrow, deck 7 bow section. Be alert at 1600 hours. Don't interfere yet. Simple words, but the exact timing told him something was planned, and that kept him sharp. He spent the morning sticking to his usual observation routine. The woman from cabin 12 to 34 appeared briefly on the main deck, walked without speaking to anyone, then disappeared toward the upper levels. Samuel didn't follow. He had no intention of breaking the distant surveillance pattern he'd maintained so far. After lunch, he went down to deck 7 well ahead of time. This section was less visited by passengers and had more limited access. From the bow, the view of the horizon was unobstructed, the wind stronger, and the sound of waves breaking against the hull louder. Samuel leaned against the railing, pretending to take photos with his phone, but his eyes scanned far beyond the frame. At 15:45, something in the distance sharpened his focus. Off the port side, a dark shape broke the clean line of the horizon. At first it looked like a small fishing boat, but its speed was unusual. It wasn't running parallel or moving away. It was cutting diagonally toward the cruise ship. Samuel narrowed his gaze, silently gauging distance and bearing. A gust of wind carried a faint smell of fuel, something that shouldn't be noticeable this far from land. His instincts told him the wind was honest. Something was closing in. A crewman passed by, gave the horizon a quick glance, and his expression shifted, just for a second, before settling back into neutrality. Samuel recognized the look. Someone who had seen what they weren't supposed to. "Nice day for sailing," Samuel tested. "Yes, nice day," the crewman replied, but the tone didn't match the words. He walked on without another word. At exactly 1600 hours, the woman in the gray dress, the one who had first passed him a note, appeared. She stopped beside him, leaned on the railing, and kept her eyes on the horizon. "Do you see it?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yes," Samuel said. "Doesn't look like a leisure craft." "It's not, and it's not alone." He frowned. "How many?" "Not all in view yet, but more than a few." She walked away as if they'd been discussing the weather. Samuel kept his gaze forward. Behind the first silhouette, two smaller vessels now emerged, moving in formation. They carried no running lights and moved with a coordination no civilian boats would bother with. He forced himself not to linger in one spot. Moving to the opposite side of the bow, he unfolded a tourist route map, acting as though he were planning excursions. From that angle, he confirmed his suspicion. The boats were adjusting course to meet the cruise ship's path. Old mission memories bled into the present. This was the same gut-deep feeling that had saved him more than once. By 4:30, the shapes had slipped behind a layer of haze. It didn't ease his mind. If anything, it made him more uneasy. Losing sight of a threat at sea was like switching off the light in a room full of strange noises. It only made the unknown louder. As he stepped back inside, he spotted one of the men he'd overheard on deck 5, the bearded one, standing near the entrance to the bow. He pretended to be on his phone, but his eyes were searching. Samuel walked past without reacting, though he marked him in his mental log. If those boats were trouble, these men might be part of the same picture. That night, eating alone, Samuel felt the ship's vibration shift. A subtle change in speed, the kind no average passenger would notice. Either the captain had altered course or power. Another quiet sign that others on board had seen something worth worrying about. Back in his cabin, a new note waited under the door. "Tonight, deck 9, starboard side. Don't go before 2300 hours. The sea will speak." He tucked it into his notebook. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the sea's voice had changed, a taut whisper under the waves. Samuel knew the vessels on the horizon hadn't vanished. They were simply waiting. And he would have to wait too, no matter how heavy each minute felt. Night fell like a heavy curtain, covering the ship in a darkness deeper than usual. Samuel checked his watch. 22:50. 10 minutes until the time written on the note. Deck 9 was only 2 levels below his cabin, but he took the longer way to avoid suspicion, going down to deck 8 first, then climbing a little-used side staircase. The corridor leading to the outer deck was nearly empty. Only one security guard stood near a service door, fiddling with his radio. He didn't seem interested in Samuel. Without a word, Samuel passed and stepped outside. The temperature had dropped. The wind carried a cold, damp bite, and the sea was unsettlingly still. The usual breeze that carried the sound of waves seemed absent. Even the steady hum of the engines was quieter, as though the ship was moving with caution. He leaned on the starboard railing. The ship's lights faded into the blackness just a few meters out, swallowed by absolute dark. He searched the horizon, where he had seen the vessels earlier that day, but saw nothing. No lights, no shadows, no distant glimmer of another ship. The ocean seemed to be holding its breath. That kind of stillness wasn't normal. Samuel knew it well. The sea is never truly silent. It always has a rhythm. Waves striking, water breaking against the hull, wind stirring ropes and fittings. But now there was only a heavy, smothering silence, as if something unseen were swallowing every sound. Far off, he thought he heard a faint creak, a dry snap, like wood giving way. He tensed, turning toward it, but saw nothing. It didn't sound like it came from the cruise ship's structure. It came from somewhere out at sea. Two passengers emerged from the doorway behind him, laughing loudly and shattering the stillness. They leaned on the railing, made a comment about the fog, and left. As soon as they were gone, the silence returned. Then came another sound, a soft, irregular tapping, like something floating and knocking lightly against the surface. 3 taps, then nothing. Samuel strained his eyes, but saw no shapes, no movement. It was as if the sea itself was playing a game, hiding its clues. At 23:10, the woman in the gray dress appeared, walking with steady steps. She wore a light coat, her loose hair shifting in the wind. She stopped beside him, eyes fixed on the black horizon. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "Yes. It's too still. They're close now. When the sea goes quiet like this, it's because it's listening." She said nothing more and left through the door. Samuel kept his gaze on the dark expanse. Her words reminded him of old seafarer superstitions he'd heard in far-off ports. When the ocean keeps its silence, it's because something big is coming. He decided not to stay longer. Heading for the exit, he turned for one last look before stepping inside. That's when he thought he saw it. A faint flash, a pinpoint of light that blinked only for a second, far away, almost beyond sight. He couldn't be sure if it was real or just a reflection, but it was enough to confirm what his instincts had been telling him for hours. The vessels from earlier hadn't left, they were waiting. Back in his cabin, he locked the door and placed his notebook on the desk without opening it. The silence of the sea still seemed to seep through the walls, heavier than ever. He knew morning might bring answers, but he also sensed this quiet night was only the prelude to something that would test everything he'd learned in his life. That night, sleep came slowly. He lay down in light clothes, ready to move if needed. Outside, the sea remained silent, as if holding a secret it was almost ready to reveal. Dawn came without the sea regaining its voice. Samuel had slept only a few hours, waking often, eyes opening to listen for changes. When the sun finally rose, the ocean moved again, but not in a way that brought comfort. The waves were shorter, choppier, as if something unseen was breaking them from below. After a quick breakfast, Samuel went to the upper deck to check the horizon. From there, he could see for kilometers, and what he saw unsettled him. Thin lines of foam cut across the water in unnatural patterns, as though small boats were maneuvering just out of sight. Their paths weren't straight. They curved sharply, moving like craft trying not to be detected. He spent the rest of the morning shifting between vantage points, never lingering too long in one place. Some of the crew were also watching the horizon, but their expressions lacked the easy smiles they showed passengers. One sailor had binoculars, but when he noticed Samuel's glance, he quickly tucked them away and walked off. Around midday, at the stern deck, a dark shadow slid quickly beneath the surface near the hull. It moved too straight, too deliberate, to be a school of fish. Samuel leaned further over the railing for another look, but it was gone. He went down to a mid-level deck for a better angle. From here, the sea was closer, and the light made it easier to read color changes in the water. That's when he saw the first boat clearly, small, dark-hulled, with twin outboard motors. It moved slowly, almost parallel to the cruise ship, keeping just far enough to avoid most eyes. No flag, no markings. Minutes later, he spotted another boat, this one on the opposite side. This wasn't coincidence. Both kept the same distance and pace, as if mapping the ship's movement before making a move. In the afternoon, the sky clouded over and the wind picked up slightly. The woman in the gray dress crossed paths with Samuel near the stern stairs. "Have you seen them?" she asked quietly. "2 boats," he replied, "one on each side." "They're not all there," she said, and walked on without another word. "They're not all there." That thought stayed with him. If two were visible, how many more hid in the fog's reach, or beyond the curve of the sea? Later, from the side deck, he saw another strange movement. A quick, diagonal wake across the water, vanishing in seconds. It was the kind of stop-and-start motion no fish or pleasure craft would make. Crew behavior was changing. They moved faster, communicating with short gestures, the usual warmth toward passengers replaced by quiet urgency. 2 security guards were posted at the bow, rare for that time of day. Samuel kept near the routes he'd monitored since the mission began, especially those leading to Deck 12, where his target was. He hadn't seen the woman from 12 to 34 all day, but he knew if anything happened, he'd have to reach her before anyone else. By evening, the sea darkened and the crew's lights came on. Samuel leaned on the railing, scanning once more. No boats were clearly visible now, but fast, darting shadows passed beneath the surface, changing direction in ways that felt like tactical maneuvers. On land, it would look like a team taking positions before an operation. The sun was gone, the sky a mass of gray. The wind carried a stronger stench of fuel, stronger than yesterday. That was no accident. The boats were closer now, close enough for the wind to bring their trail to the ship. Back in his cabin, he noticed the hallway lights were dimmer than usual, as if the crew wanted to make the ship less visible from outside. Under his door lay another note: "Stay ready. Next time you see them, they won't just be testing the waters." He set the note with the others and looked out from the balcony. In the dark, he thought he saw a fleeting glint of metal where the waves broke against something unseen. The waiting was almost over. Dawn broke under a gray sky, the sea looking darker than usual. Samuel was up before the first breakfast bell. He dressed in plain clothes, checked the nearest exits from his cabin, and slipped his notebook into his pocket. The heavy scent of fuel he'd noticed the night before was stronger now, unmistakable. He moved to the side deck, where the wind hit straight on, and scanned the horizon. He didn't have to wait long. Out on the gray water, the first boats appeared, larger than any he'd seen in the past days. They weren't hiding anymore. They were coming straight at the cruise ship, cutting white trails with engines running full power. As they closed in, human shapes became clear. These weren't fishermen or tourists. They were men dressed in dark clothing, most with their faces covered by scarves or balaclavas. Some carried long guns, visible even from this distance. Their advance was steady and fast, without hesitation. Samuel swept the perimeter of the ship with his eyes. Smaller boats were coming in from other angles, working to surround the vessel. There were at least 6, each with 4 to 6 men aboard. This was no surveillance run. This was a direct attack. On deck, a few passengers were starting to notice. A woman pointed at one of the boats and asked aloud what it was. A man pulled out his phone to record. The murmuring grew, and Samuel knew panic could spread within minutes if no one controlled the situation. At the bow, he saw the captain speaking urgently into a radio with 2 officers at his side. The crew began closing access points and quietly steering passengers inside, their voices polite to avoid raising alarm. Samuel stayed calm. His mission was still to protect the woman in cabin 12 to 34, but the context had shifted. An attack like this could mean kidnapping, robbery, or worse. A cruise ship was a slow, soft target. Hundreds of passengers and very few real defenses. Through a pair of compact binoculars he'd carried since day one, he counted at least 3 rifle-armed men in the nearest boat. One lifted his weapon and pointed toward the cruise ship, likely marking a boarding spot. Another stood in the bow holding a rope with a heavy metal hook, clear intent to latch on and climb. The engine's roar grew louder, a deep, insistent hum cutting through the wind. 2 of the boats surged ahead, their wakes slicing the water sharply. They meant to reach the hull first, giving the others time to arrive. A crewman ran past Samuel, speaking into a handheld radio. "All positions! Secure the side access points." He didn't even glance at Samuel, which let him move freely. Samuel dropped one level, positioning himself closer to where he suspected the first boarding attempt would hit. From there, the view was sharper. The lead boat was close enough for him to see the attackers' faces, or what little showed under their coverings. These were modern pirates, automatic weapons, light tactical vests, rubber boots for grip. Some carried machetes on their belts. They were kit for fast, brutal work. Another boat appeared from the opposite side, equally loaded. Their coordination was obvious. If they made it aboard, it wouldn't be a single skirmish. They'd need to be repelled in several locations at once. Over the ship's PA system, the captain's voice carried an official comm. All passengers were to remain indoors, due to a security maneuver. It was a careful way to avoid saying attack. Even so, fear was spreading. People were gathering at windows, filming, whispering. Samuel stepped back against the wall, weighing his options. He had no weapon, but he had his training and the ship's layout mapped in his head. If the crew focused on sealing entry points, he could use his mobility to get to 12-34 sector fast, keeping anyone from reaching her. He glanced once more at the sea. The nearest boats were less than 200 meters away now. The engine noise, the slap of waves against the hull, and shouted orders in a language he didn't recognize blended into a raw prelude to chaos. The tense calm of the past days was gone. Now came the part he had never wanted, but was always prepared for. The first thud against the hull rang through Samuel's feet like the beat of a deep drum. It wasn't strong, but it was clear enough. Contact had begun. From his position on the mid-deck, he heard the harsh scrape of metal as a grappling hook caught on the railing. The sound was uncomfortably familiar. He'd heard it countless times during boarding drills in his military days. Engines roared closer, layered with shouts in a language he couldn't fully make out. Crew members rushed in every direction, some speaking urgently into radios, others ushering passengers inside. Over the PA, the captain kept repeating, "Please remain inside the common areas. This is a preventive maneuver. We ask you to stay calm." But calm was already slipping away. In a side dining area, a family argued with a crewman because they wanted to go film what was happening. Down another corridor, a group of nervous young men laughed too loudly, peering out a window like it was a show. Samuel knew that blend of fear and curiosity was dangerous. It would only take one pirate firing a shot to ignite full-scale panic. He didn't waste time. He moved toward the stairs leading to Deck 12, intent on reaching cabin 12-34 before anyone else could. Along the way, he passed a corridor where two crew members shoved furniture and cleaning carts against a side door. Improvised barricades, buying precious minutes. When he reached Deck 12, the hallway was quieter, but tension hummed under the stillness. Fast footsteps and voices echoed from the far end. Samuel hugged the wall as he approached. The Do Not Disturb sign still hung on the door to 12-34, but something new caught his eye. A key in the lock. He knocked softly. "Maintenance. Everything okay?" he asked, voice neutral. From inside came a firm but calm reply. The voice of a woman he'd seen before with a book. "All fine. I don't need anything." That was enough to confirm she was still there. Samuel stepped back a few meters, taking up a position where he could watch the hallway without being visible from her door. Outside, an engine roared louder, followed by hard bangs against the hull. Short, sharp cries came from somewhere near the waterline. The boarding was underway. The crew had sealed several entries, but not all. Too many access points on a ship this size. A crewman burst from the stairwell, breathless. "Boarders on Deck 10. "At least 4," he shouted to another, who was already speaking into his radio. Time was running out. If the pirates gained ground below, they'd try to move up quickly. If they reached this corridor, it could turn into a trap. A metallic crash echoed from below, followed by a dull, heavy thud, like a door giving way. Samuel's mind shifted into fast calculation. Keep the woman out of sight and help prevent passengers from scattering into danger. He glanced down the stairwell and saw 2 crewmen herding a group toward the ship's center. "Stay together. Don't break off," one shouted. The order was right, but execution was chaotic. Some ran, others froze. 2 children cried, clinging to their parents. Samuel went down a few steps to help guide them into a safer room. He couldn't risk them being caught between attackers and crew. When he returned to Deck 12, the air felt heavier. Emergency lights flickered on, painting the walls in pulsing red. This wasn't a minor incident anymore. The ship was in high-security mode. More crashes rang out from below. Not hull impacts. These were too solid. They were hammering on interior doors, testing for weak points. Samuel moved to the corridor's far end, eyes fixed on 12 to 34. He didn't know how long the defenses would hold, but when they broke, he knew he wouldn't be standing still. The shouts in the distance grew louder, and then came a new sound, short, clipped bursts, muffled by the ship's structure but unmistakable: gunfire. There was no turning back. The attack was fully underway. The first shots, though distant, triggered something in Samuel that had been dormant for years. It wasn't fear, it was a state change, going from civilian to soldier. His breathing slowed, his vision sharpened, and every sound became a signal he needed to process. The hallway on Deck 12 was empty, but the noises rising from the lower levels were unmistakable. Fast footsteps, metal bangs, short, urgent shouts. The intruders moved like a trained unit, advancing in rapid bursts. Samuel knew this gave them an advantage over the crew, most of whom were unarmed and had little experience with real combat. He reached the door to cabin 12 to 34 and spoke quietly. "Stay inside. Lock the door with whatever you can." There was no answer, but he heard something heavy scrape against the door. Good, he thought. At least she understood the urgency. He didn't wait for the attackers to reach this corridor. If they took it, keeping them out would be difficult. He moved toward the nearest staircase, descending a level to intercept them before they reached this deck. There, he found 2 crew members trying to push a heavy laundry cart to block a side access. Samuel joined them silently, pushing hard until the cart was wedged in place. "Thanks," one of them said, face tight with worry. "No problem," Samuel replied. "How many have come up?" "For on this side, but we think there are more coming from the bow." Samuel knew that 4 seemed few, but in a confined space with firearms, they could control the area if no one stood against them. He descended another flight of stairs and entered a narrow corridor leading to Deck 10. From there, he saw one of the pirates rounding the corner. The man carried a short rifle and had a backpack slung over his shoulder. Samuel pressed against the wall, calculating the distance and waiting. When the intruder passed him, he landed a solid shoulder check, disarming him in one smooth movement he'd perfected during his years of service. The rifle clattered to the ground, and Samuel kicked it out of reach. The pirate reacted by reaching for a knife, but Samuel shoved him hard against the wall, landing a second blow that knocked him unconscious. Without wasting time, Samuel picked up the rifle, checked it was loaded, and moved on. He knew he couldn't face all of them, but with a weapon in hand, he had a chance to slow them down. He reached an intersection of corridors and saw 2 more pirates crouched behind a luggage cart being used as cover. One fired at a group of crew members trying to close a fire door. Samuel used the sound to move to the side, taking a lateral shooting position. 2 precise shots, non-lethal but effective, forced the attackers to retreat toward the stairs. "Close it now!" Samuel shouted to the crew member by the fire door. The metal door slammed shut with a loud bang, blocking the access in that sector. Still, Samuel knew the danger wasn't over. These men weren't going to be deterred by one obstacle. They'd find another way in. He retraced his steps to deck 12. On the way, he passed a group of passengers hiding in a small children's playroom. One child looked up at him, eyes wide with fear. Samuel gestured for him to stay silent. When he got back to the corridor outside cabin 12 to 34, everything was the same for now. The silence was deceptive. It could mean the pirates were regrouping for another attack, or that they had found another route. He glanced out a side window and saw something that confirmed his suspicions. Another boat was approaching, faster than the previous ones, and it carried men who appeared better equipped. One of them held what looked like a portable launcher. Samuel clenched his jaw. He knew if they managed to place an explosive charge on one of the doors, the boarding would be complete. Just then, the ship's intercom crackled, a nervous voice from the crew. "We need support on deck 8. I repeat, support on deck 8. Samuel looked at the door to 12 to 34, then at the stairs leading down. He knew every minute counted, and if deck 8 fell, this corridor would be exposed. He took a deep breath, gripped the rifle, and decided it was time to go down and hold the line. The soldier inside him was back, and there was no room for hesitation. Samuel walked down the stairs to deck 8, taking careful steps, holding the rifle he had taken from the pirate. The air felt heavier down here, filled with the smell of fuel and sweat. The sound of the sea, once far away, now mixed with shouting and the sound of boots hitting the metal hull. The ship was no longer calm. Every time a wave hit, the floor shook, as if reminding them that the ocean could also be an enemy. On the main hallway of deck 8, the scene was chaotic. 2 crew members were trying to close an emergency door, while 3 pirates, armed and shouting in a fast, sharp language, moved forward, hiding behind columns and overturned furniture. The gunshots rang out like metal hammer strikes. Samuel didn't introduce himself or ask for permission. He took a side position, looking for an angle. 2 controlled shots were enough to make the attackers fall back and find new cover. He used those few seconds to shout at the crew, "Close the door now." The metal slid slowly until it clicked shut with a sharp sound. One of the pirates hit it from the other side, but they couldn't get through there anymore. However, Samuel knew this was just one less entry point on his map. There were still other ways in. The ship shook with a stronger wave, making everyone struggle to keep their balance. One crew member fell, and his radio slid several meters before Samuel grabbed it. The captain's voice crackled over the channel. "Attention, aft deck compromised. I repeat, compromised. Avoid access." Before he could reply, he heard a metallic sound above him. The intruders were trying to use the outer scaffolding to move between levels, avoiding the blocked internal routes. That meant they could appear anywhere on deck without warning. Samuel moved to a side hallway, where he found 2 passengers trapped behind some overturned luggage. They were scared but unharmed. He signaled for them to follow him and led them to a storage room with a locked door. "Don't open to anyone who isn't identified, crew," he warned before closing the door. At the far end of the hall, he heard a different sound, a dull, repetitive thud against metal. He peeked out and saw 2 pirates trying to open a side hatch leading to the sea. One held a hook tied to a rope, probably connected to one of the boats. If they managed to open it, more men would come up directly there. Samuel fired a short burst at the ground near their feet. The loud noise bounced off the metal, forcing them to retreat. He took the opportunity to run to the hatch and secure it with the locking bar. The hook dangled, gently tapping with the swaying of the waves. From below, a frustrated shout was lost in the wind. The sea kept getting rougher. The waves hit harder, and the ship tilted slightly from side to side. That instability made it harder to move and aim. Samuel used it to his advantage. He had trained in worse conditions, but the attackers seemed to rely on stability to keep control of their weapons. At the bow, he found a group of crew members trying to push an industrial cart to block a door. He helped them set up the barrier, then took position in the corner, covering the entrance. A pirate appeared for a moment and threw something that rolled across the floor. A stun grenade. Samuel barely had time to duck and cover before the explosion filled the hallway with a deafening noise and white flashes. His ears were ringing, but adrenaline kept him on his feet. Through the fog of the moment, he saw a figure rush in. Without hesitation, he charged with his shoulder, struck the weapon with the barrel of his rifle, and knocked it out of the pirate's hands. The pirate fell, and Samuel pushed him back, quickly closing the door before anyone else could get through. As the echo of the fight faded, the veteran leaned against the wall. He couldn't stay there much longer. The attackers were searching for weak points, and on such a large ship, there was always one. The goal was still the same: prevent them from reaching Deck 12, and especially the woman in cabin 12 to 34. The crew member's radio came on again. "We're losing the aft deck. We need backup now. If they take it, they'll have direct access to the central elevators." Samuel took a deep breath. He knew what that meant. If they controlled the elevators, they could move quickly throughout the ship. That would change the fight in seconds. He had to move now. He adjusted the rifle, made sure it was loaded, and started moving toward the noise, following the rumble of the sea and the shouts that mixed with the creaking of metal. The fight for control of the ship was far from over, and the ocean, with every more violent wave, seemed to be on the wrong side. Samuel moved down the hallway toward the stern, rifle secured against his shoulder. Each step took him closer to the most compromised part of the ship, where the pirates were about to gain a decisive advantage: control of the central elevators. If they succeeded, they could move through the decks as if they owned the place, showing up where they were least expected. The roar of the sea was louder in this part of the ship. Each wave hit so hard that the walls vibrated. The emergency lights blinked, casting red and white flashes that made the shadows seem to move. The air was thick with humidity, gunpowder, and tension. As he turned the last corner, Samuel saw the scene. 3 pirates were already inside the elevator area, using the gaps for cover. One of them was messing with the control panel, probably trying to force the system to respond only to their commands. Further back, 2 injured crew members were trying to crawl to a safe corner. Samuel knew he couldn't let them activate the elevator controls, but he also understood that facing 3 armed men head-on was almost suicidal. He had to decide: get backup and risk it being too late, or act now and trust in his experience. He took a deep breath. "Now or never," he whispered to himself. He chose a risky move. He moved down a side hallway that connected to the area behind the elevators. The path took him past a service door, where he found a cart with heavy tools. He grabbed a large wrench and tucked it into his belt. Could be useful if he ran out of ammo. He silently approached a ventilation grate right behind one of the pirates. From that position, he could hear the pirate's heavy breathing. He waited for the sound of the sea to cover his movement and carefully pushed the grate until it fell inside. He entered quickly, raised his rifle, and fired 2 short bursts, forcing the men to drop to the ground. The third, the one at the control panel, turned to respond, but Samuel was already on him. He struck the weapon with the wrench, deflecting the barrel, and then shoved him into the wall. The impact was sharp. The other 2 tried to regroup, but Samuel used the elevator covers for reduced target space. The ship's rocking, with the waves crashing harder, made it difficult for the pirates to aim properly. Taking advantage of the floor's tilt, Samuel slid to within a couple of meters of them and shot the floor to force them to retreat. One of the injured crew members managed to crawl to the wall and, with visible effort, pressed a button that closed a security hatch between the elevator area and the hallway where the pirates had come in. The metallic crash marked a small win, but the veteran knew it wasn't decisive. The sea hit with such force that a deep vibration ran through the structure. Samuel lost his balance for a moment, and one of the pirates took the chance to strike. The rifle fell to the floor and slid a few meters. They wrestled, the man trying to pull out a knife, while the other pirate tried to find an angle to shoot. Samuel twisted quickly, using the ship's movement to push his attacker into the wall, leaving the second pirate with no clear shot. In that moment, one of the crew members picked up the fallen rifle and fired at the ceiling to distract them. It was enough for Samuel to recover the wrench and land a blow that knocked out the pirate in front of him. The last one decided to retreat to the emergency stairs, disappearing into the smoke and noise. The veteran leaned against the wall, panting. He looked at the injured crew members. "Can you stay here?" he asked. "Yes, but not for long," one replied. Samuel assessed the situation. He had stopped them from taking the elevators, but the fight was still going on in other parts of the ship. Also, the woman in cabin 12 to 34 was still a potential target, and he had no way of knowing if another group of attackers was already near her. He made an even riskier decision. Go straight to the point where he thought the attack was being coordinated. If he could destabilize the leaders, the rest might lose momentum, but that meant leaving the direct protection of his target, betting that the defenses he had set up would be enough to keep her safe. If this goes wrong, he thought as he moved toward the stairs, there won't be a second chance. The fight at the heart of the attack had lasted minutes, but Samuel felt it like hours. A mix of sweat, smoke, and salt filled every corner of the hallway, where the last pirates had finally been subdued. The crew's coordination, combined with his direct intervention, had forced the attackers to fall back. The sea began to calm slowly, as if the ocean had decided to release the crew's ship from its violent grip. The waves still hit, but not with the same fury. The constant roar turned into a more regular murmur. The external threat had passed, but on board, the air was still heavy with tension. Samuel, with the rifle slung over his shoulder and his clothes soaked with sweat, walked through the hallways toward deck 12. He had to make sure the woman in cabin 12 to 34 was still safe. On the way, he saw the aftermath of the battle. Overturned furniture, broken glass, dark stains on the floor, and passengers gathered in small groups, some shaking, others crying quietly. There were thankful looks toward the crew and also toward him, though no one knew exactly who he was or what role he had played. When he reached the 12 to 34 hallway, it was intact. He knocked softly on the door. "It's over," he said quietly. He didn't get a response, but after a few seconds, he heard the sound of the lock sliding. The woman opened the door just enough to show her face. She was pale but unharmed. "Thank you," she whispered, before closing the door again. Samuel didn't push. He didn't need explanations or recognition. His mission was complete, at least for now. The crew began to reorganize the ship. The loudspeakers announced that the situation was under control and that everything would return to normal soon. But Samuel knew that normal was a fragile word. What they had experienced that night would leave invisible scars. On the passengers, on the crew, and on him. He stayed for a few minutes on the outer deck, looking at the horizon. The sea, under the gray light of dawn, seemed innocent, as if it hadn't been the scene of violence just hours earlier. That deceptive calm reminded him of something he had learned during his military life. The deepest wounds are not always visible at first glance. In his mind, images of the battle flashed by. The metallic thud of the hook on the railing, shadows running through the halls, the blast of the stun grenade. It was all behind him now, but the memory kept replaying the scene over and over. A crew member came up and offered him a bottle of water. "Without you, we wouldn't be standing," he said in a serious voice. Samuel just nodded. He wasn't there for praise, and he knew there was still work to be done. Making sure no attackers remained on board and that the cruise ship stayed on course to the nearest port. In the distance, he saw a couple of Coast Guard boats approaching. Their presence meant that they would soon take control of the situation and escort the cruise ship to its destination. Passengers were starting to peek out onto the decks, some to take photos, others to confirm with their own eyes that the danger had passed. Samuel returned to his cabin. He placed the rifle on the bed and washed his hands, watching as the water turned slightly gray, a mix of salt and gunpowder dust. He looked at himself in the mirror. A tired face, more lines of worry, but still the same steady look as always. That night, he hadn't been a soldier because of his uniform or orders, but because of instinct. And even though he wouldn't say it out loud, he knew that instinct would continue to be with him, even in the peaceful life he had tried to build. As the ship continued on its course and the sun began to rise, he felt that the silence was no longer a threat like the night before. It was a silence of relief, but also of reflection. The sea had calmed, yes, but he knew that every wave that broke against the hull was a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. The dawn brought a clear sky and a sea that, after so many hours of tension, seemed to mock them with its calm. The cruise ship moved forward, escorted by 2 Coast Guard boats that kept a careful distance, like wolves watching over their pack. On board, the crew worked tirelessly to repair damages, clean hallways, and reorganize common areas. The smell of gunpowder slowly faded, mixing with the aroma of coffee that was beginning to circulate again in the cafeterias. Samuel stayed on the upper deck, watching as the coast slowly appeared on the horizon. The first lines of buildings looked unreal, as if they were part of a model someone had placed there to reassure the passengers. For him, every meter they got closer to land was confirmation that the mission was complete, but not necessarily closed in his mind. The passengers started moving more freely, though groups were still quietly talking about what had happened. Some exaggerated details, others claimed to have seen things that probably never occurred. There were those who, purely out of denial, spoke as if it had all been a training drill or a minor incident. Samuel knew that the truth rarely survives intact when rumors spread. At the stern, the woman from cabin 12 to 34 appeared briefly. She walked alone, holding the same book, as if trying to stay unnoticed even after everything that had happened. As she passed near Samuel, she lowered her voice. "You did your job." He nodded, not looking for any further conversation. It wasn't the time for explanations, and probably never would be. Their bond was as silent as the mission itself. As the ship entered the port area, a crowd waited on the dock. Agents, doctors, journalists, and curious onlookers. Cameras pointed toward the ship, but Samuel knew no one would capture all that had really happened during those hours. The official story, when it was published, would be cleaner, shorter, and easier to digest for those who hadn't been there. What he had seen and done would remain between the few who had truly been at the heart of the storm. The disembarkation was orderly. Passengers descended in groups, escorted by crew members and security agents. Samuel waited his turn, staying at the end of the line. He didn't want to attract attention or be approached by the press. When he stepped onto solid ground, he felt a strange relief, as if his body and mind couldn't agree on how to process what had happened. On the dock, a Coast Guard officer intercepted him. "Rojas, right?" he asked, checking a list. "Yes. Thanks for your help. We have reports, well, let's say several witnesses agree it was decisive." Samuel didn't respond. The officer, understanding he wasn't looking for recognition, simply shook his hand and walked away. With his small suitcase over his shoulder, he walked down the dock, away from the noise. The sound of seagulls and the smell of the sea breeze were a harsh contrast to the images still burned in his mind. The boats speeding toward them, the thud of the hook on the railing, the hallway lit by red emergency lights, the echo of gunshots. He knew that over time, those memories would mix, but they would never disappear. He stopped for a moment before leaving the port and looked back. The cruise ship, now still, seemed like a sleeping giant, unable to show the marks of the battle it had endured. Passengers were disembarking, smiling, taking photos, some even joking. Samuel wondered how many of them truly understood how close they had come to never stepping on land again. With one last glance, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. He didn't wear medals or titles to identify him as a hero, and that was just how he preferred it. To most, he would just be another passenger. To a few, he would be the man who, on the most dangerous night of that journey, acted without hesitation. And for him, it would be an unforgettable memory, a story he would probably never tell fully, but that would live on in his mind as one of those battles that don't appear in books, though they change the course of a life. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time.